Hi, welcome to my new video. In some previous videos in the description you can find them, I've talked about Distrobox on Linux, what its use cases are, how it, grants you extra compatibility in your systems, etc. And in both of their videos, one of them was, talking about Distrobox specifically, and in the other one more as a part of the process, I've talked about utilizing separate home directives. Why did I do this? For a specific reason. Let's go. Now, working with containers on Linux, it's a whole other topic, and I'm just scratching the surface here. Now, Distrobox is a wrapper for container systems on Linux, and it provides many functionalities, and I did not even cover 20% of that. Not even. Example, I have my entire music production system set up, running inside an Arch Linux Distrobox container running for Podman, running on my Fedora host. Right, a complicated system, especially for beginners, but all in all, it works flawlessly. I do not even have latency issues, etc. So my approach to music production, my approach to Linux, etc. is more on the unconventional side, one might say. But to come back to the original topic, and different home directives. Why the hell am I specifying this setup here? Because if you do not do in the creation process of a Distrobox container, in the videos I've covered these setups, you have the choice to specify a specific home directive. And especially on my music production setup, I've done this. I've done this specifically. Why did I do this? First of all, if you do not specify a unique home directive for your Distrobox container, then it writes its own configuration files, but also changes every configuration file in your user/username/home directive, where your host system also writes its configuration files. Now, one might think, why is this a problem? For example, let's just take an example. You have a Debian system, Debian 12 for example, onto which you install Podman Distrobox, into which you install Arch Linux. But you do not specify a specific home directive. So what's going to happen? Your host system, Debian, writes its configuration files into the home directive, but so does Arch Linux container. Why could this be a problem? For example, let's take a program and let's just call it program X. Program X stands for any arbitrary program, may it be a background service, may it be a package tool you have installed manually, etc. The difference between Debian and Arch would be that Debian, for example, it takes way longer for a version Y, for example, to reach Debian, because Debian evolves far slower, because Debian packages have way more testing before they are accessible in the repositories for Debian users. Unlike Arch, where there's not as much testing and they are accessible way earlier, sometimes even years before. So what other issues could arise? For example, you install many different packages in your Debian host system and some packages in your Arch container. But some packages are identical, just different versions. Why could this be a problem? Maybe you have installed on your Debian system a package and it writes its configuration files in a certain old folder. It uses some dependencies here and there. Its configuration files is configured to access certain directives, etc. in your home directive. But the exact same program with a way newer version inside your Arch Linux container does exactly that. But maybe in a newer version, which is only accessible by the Arch Linux container, some configuration files have changed to be usable on Arch Linux. So Arch Linux container overrides the Debian configuration files of said program, and now this program on a Debian host no longer works. Maybe. I again never had this issue. It's just a hypothetical problem you should be really cautious. Also, for example, working with different kind of Wine versions, because in my music production setup, I need to work with 9.20 in order to work with Yardbridge. I've covered this topic already. But on my host system, for example, I want to have the newest version of Wine, for whatever reason. Now, if I would have the same home directive and not a separate one, you know, I would have, if I downgrade the Wine version on my Archlinux container, it would override my host system. And I might not want to do this. So if I specify a unique home directive, there are many different advantages you do have. It would be, I would be able to install different kind of Wine versions in parallel. The likelihood of data conflict, you know, is immensely lower. Process of utilizing separate home directive also grants you some extra stability, so that you know one container or a host system do not create conflicts with each other. Does not override the system files of another one. And again, these are hyper-specific issues, but you know, if you are working with a Linux distro for a long time and suddenly a program no longer works and you did not specify home directive, for example, it could screw you up in the long term. Separate home directive also gives you a way cleaner workflow and makes packaging and working with packages way easier, and you have way more control over your programs, your computer, etc. in that regard. I hope I made my point really clear. Maybe, you know, especially if you're a beginner on Linux, one might be overwhelmed with all the different possibilities and setups, especially with programs that only work in a specific distro. With Distrobox you can bypass some compatibility issues, but here and there some extra configuration steps should be explained more carefully. And I mean, on the developer website of Distrobox, it is explained how you can, you know, install a separate home directive, but it's just not really something that pops up right in front of you when you open the website. Personally think it's immensely important to understand before you even continue the working process with containers, in my opinion. But yeah. Thanks for watching this video. I hope this video was enlightening, blah blah blah. Yeah, keep working, because there's still much to do, and go read Berserk.